Hello, everyone. I am Cassie Martin, Executive Director of Special Education at the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, OSPI. I'm excited to have the opportunity to interview and learn more about our 2023 Washington State Teacher of the Year, Dana Miles. Dana has been a teacher for 11 years and has spent the last 6 years teaching work experience and applied bilingual language arts at the Washington School for the Deaf. In Dana's applied bilingual language arts classes, she teaches English and American Sign Language interchangeably, preparing students for life after high school using real world contexts. So I'm going to start with the first question for Dana. Dana, what brought you into education and what keeps you engaged and excited about the work?
Right. So as far as what brought me to education, it really started with my mom. She was a teacher and is now retired, but she used to teach math and science for, more than 20 years, I think about 25 years or something like that. And she also actually used to teach at the same school that I am currently at. So she taught at Washington School for the Deaf too. So basically growing up with her as a teacher, I remember seeing her grading papers and getting ready for class. I would ride with her to school as well. And, just kind of my life with her was 24/7 education. And so that really is what got me started into seeing what that world was like. Later on, I went to Gallaudet University for my bachelor's degree I suppose before I decided my major, I wanted to be a social worker. However, I was approached by three different professors at the time, three different people, and they said, "Hey, have you thought about being a teacher?" And I was like, I don't think so. I don't want to be like my mom, follow exactly in her footsteps. I'm going to be something original, something different. But, after I had thought about it, I decided, after all, okay, I think I do want to become a teacher. And so that's really what got me started in my career in teaching. So that's kind of the first portion. Um, as far as what keeps me in it and keeps things exciting for me in teaching, I really love creating relationships with people. I really enjoy getting to know people and all kinds of people. So at WSD, I'm able to do that, and I can relate with so many different people, whether it be teachers, teachers aide, administrators, support staff, custodians, residential staff. They all know sign language there. So that is really what keeps me going. Also the students, of course. The students are one of the biggest reasons why I love working there. They inspire me so much, and they start new and shy sometimes in school, but then you see them develop that confidence and be ready for the real world. And I really love seeing them again. Also post graduation, they come and say hi, and they're, "Oh, I have this job. I'm doing whatever," and it just makes me feel good as a teacher to see that. So that is why I've become a teacher.
Thanks, Dana. And I mentioned in the introduction, at WSD, you were teaching applied bilingual language arts class. Can you explain what that means, both the applied part and the bilingual part, and the benefits of this learning for the students in your class?
Sure, yeah. So when we say applied bilingual language arts, BLA, we talk about the applied part, and that is really talking about English lessons that relate to real world information. So basically teaching about what's around you, housing, transportation, reading a recipe for cooking, even self-care at times. I'll teach them how to take care of themselves through the language and how to express that you're okay, how to balance your life and your work. So that applied can also be almost like adulting class, so we say these days. So that's the applied portion. All of my lessons focus on real world topics. When you're talking about the bilingual language arts piece, the BLA piece, it's really about teaching two languages. So in this case, American Sign Language, ASL, and English. It's really important to teach those two different languages because that's how you teach English, is to be able to bridge their primary language of ASL to the second language or the other language that they're acquiring, which is English. So I will sign something specific in ASL, and then we'll show what that looks like in print, what that word is in print, so that they can make that connection and connect that bridge. I like to kind of use an example. If you take a foreign language class, for example, if you're taking a Spanish class, it's kind of like, how would you learn Spanish? So you would start with English. Your dominant language in this case is English. So you'd start with that. For example, the English word for book is B-O-O-K, book, as we know. And then the Spanish word for that is libro. And so you would then make the connection. And so that's essentially what I do with ASL to English and bridging those two.
Great, thank you. So inclusion, community, and belonging are terms currently used quite a bit in education. Can you talk about what inclusion, community, and belonging means to you?
Yeah, so I'm going to just check my notes really quick on this one. So I pause for that because inclusion is really complicated, right? It's not as simple as people think oftentimes. I think sometimes people think that inclusion just means putting other people together in the same room and that equals inclusion. I understand in general the definition of the word can be that, but it's not necessarily like a person such as me, a person with a disability or a deaf person. Am I always going to feel included in a room full of hearing people? It kind of depends. So some of the questions may have, for example, is there an interpreter there where I can actually use my language? Yes, that is helpful, but I don't always have access to environmental information or being able to just kind of organically connect with the person next to me. I don't have those same opportunities. And also when interpreting, at best, the information that's being provided is about 80% accurate. So that means that we're missing out on about 20% of things where I have to kind of compensate by looking around at the screen in the room, if there is one, or maybe looking at notes in front of me or around the table. It's really hard. It's more exhausting for me in these environments. So obviously, if I could just go to any room or any space full of people who know sign language, it does make me feel more normalized. My disability as a deaf person just disappears once everybody is using that same language. It feels more like that sense of belonging. So I think it's really important to discuss inclusion and allow, especially a child in this case, lead that discussion and ask what they want and what they need. It's really important to start with them and their needs. Sometimes a student or a child might not know in their case what they need or what they want. So my next suggestion would then be to ask other folks who might have the same disability and what has helped them succeed in their lives. What has worked for them in the past, just as an appropriate representation, you know what I mean? So it's not always depending on a teacher or something like that. And sometimes the teachers know, but it's also a good idea to ask people who have that same shared experience or the same disability to see what has worked for them. Really people with disabilities, they always feel like they're not enough in a lot of situations. It always feels like there's a disparity or that they need to be fixed. And so, whenever you can have your own space where everyone has that shared experience and shared disability, you can kind of just be. That is always something to consider when we talk about inclusion.
Thank you, Dana. So are there common questions you get about teaching at WSD? And what have you learned from your work there that could be applied to schools all over Washington?
Mm-hmm. So two things come to mind. Firstly, I'm always surprised, and this is actually a really common question. People always say, hey, at your school, you only teach sign language, right? You only teach ASL. And I'm thinking, no, we teach all different subjects, but through ASL. So that's always really interesting. I'm always surprised that that education needs to happen with people. It's really cool though too, because I'm able to tell them like, we have ASL classes, we have deaf studies classes, and their response is always like, really? And so there's so much information to share, and it really opens their eyes. So it's really interesting. Those are questions that I do continue to receive from the public. Another thing that I've seen a lot is it's more of a sensitive question that I think people are afraid to ask, but I've seen it asked in a lot of different ways where they say, okay, it's a school for the deaf, so it's just ASL, and I don't mean like just ASL, but they think, oh, you only use ASL. And I say, yeah. And they say, oh, how do you prepare them for the real world? And when they say the real world, they mean the hearing world, right? That's kind of their context. I find that question so interesting, and I can understand their concern and where they're coming from. But, I really believe that when a child is in an environment that helps them thrive, that will really develop confidence for them. And that confidence is so important and really key for their success. You know what I mean? So with that confidence, they can advocate for themselves, they can overcome these barriers. So at WSD, Washington School for the Deaf, you would not believe how many students show up, like I was saying before, kind of intimidated or shy or nervous or not as confident, unsure. And then they just have this full transformation and they take on leadership roles and they become very confident. They just blossom by the time they leave school. And that to me is key. That is key to their success. And I really feel like that is so important and could apply to other schools. So thinking of yourself as a teacher, are students in the environment really thriving? And, we talk about the least restrictive environment, LRE. Are they in an environment that is really enriching? Is it helping them thrive? If the answer is yes, then they'll be more likely to build that confidence that they need for success in life.
What are your goals and priorities as the 2023 Washington State Teacher of the Year? And what information and innovations are you hoping to share with colleagues and partners across Washington?
Okay, let me just check my notes. I have some for that too. So goal and priorities is definitely language acquisition. So what that looks like for our deaf children is really sign language. And the reason is because it's visual and it is fully accessible. So, I think about myself and my personal experience. That is really what worked. I had language since birth. My parents are both deaf, and I have an older brother who's hearing, but he knew sign language already by the time I was born. So it was a signing household, and I immediately had access to English as well. So they were able to use sign language to make that bridge to English. A big priority for me is so that people can be aware of the importance of teaching sign language at a very early age for young children, because so many deaf children really experience something that's called language deprivation. Some people are not sure what that means, so I can explain. It's not that language is being taken away from them because they did not have language to begin with. It's more of giving them access to language, and that's full access. Sometimes they'll try speech therapy, but the problem with that is that with some deaf children, they may only have access to speech about 50% of the time, as opposed to other deaf children who might have access to more. So why not give them something that would guarantee 100% access, which in this case is sign language, and that's what I'm pushing for. Right now, there's nothing in our legislation that basically will push for early start in their language acquisition. There's nothing right now. There's several other states who do have things mentioned, and it's called Lead K. We don't have anything like that yet, but I'm hoping that my platform, with that, I'm able to spread awareness as well as encourage decision makers to consider including that in legislation. So that's one. another thing, I feel like this message is kind of already getting spread, but I would love to help it spread a little bit more. It's really embracing us with our disability and normalizing us, see beyond our disability and look at our abilities instead. Kind of that message that I really want to spread. And speaking of that, if you're able to look at our abilities, it kind of leads into asset-based learning. And I'm so glad now that that is becoming more prevalent and really trending in education. It's great timing. What I also want to see within that asset-based learning approach is just to consider performance-based assessment. So I feel like right now our language assessments, or I'm sorry, not language assessments, our assessments for really anything. For example, going into a vocational training school, they have to pass with a high level of reading and writing literacy. And so how are they able to enter that program, which actually requires hands so oftentimes, so it kind of defeats the purpose of enrollment, where you want someone to get training for a job that requires the use of hands or manual, some sort of work, but then to have a high level of reading and writing, I feel that that is a barrier. So we're really hoping that we can shift that focus to a different type of assessment. And again, it goes back to one of my big priorities, which is to increase work opportunities for all people with disabilities. I just feel that we are getting better, but we still have a lot of work to do. And so those are two of my main priorities: language acquisition and access, and employment opportunities for all.
You've already accomplished a lot, it seems like. You have your goals really well mapped out. And I know that you're still early in your journey as Teacher of the Year, but what have you learned so far that has surprised you, that you're learning or that you're excited about?
Hmm. Think about that. One thing that has been touching for me, kind of emotional for me, is realizing that people are ready. So when I say that, what I mean is people are very open. Their hearts and their minds are open and they're ready to embrace people with disabilities. I have to tell you, that is very powerful for me because I mean, I feel like I could even get emotional right now. My parents are, being deaf, they would share stories about how they were raised, and let me tell you, they were ashamed of being deaf. My mom, if she signed in the classroom, the teacher would hit their hands with a ruler. That would happen in the classroom. My grandmother would tell my mom, stop signing or sign small if we were out, because they would be so embarrassed to show people that she had a deaf daughter. So when my grandma found out that her baby, so my mother, was deaf, other people actually told her, oh, it's a curse. You're cursed. God is punishing you because you eloped when you were young. And so it was that sort of mindset and those things. My mom went through a lot of trauma, and my dad as well. My dad, he really had to use his voice and he had to use his speech for the first 18 years of life. He had no interpreter growing up. He really struggled in school. He loved it so much, but he never really felt like he was smart enough. When he went to Gallaudet University, an environment where everybody signs, he felt behind and he felt left out and very overwhelmed. But after he got acclimated, he really felt at home in that environment. So from that to now, and there's been so many changes. Like, for example, if you just go to the food store, the grocery store, and you want to check out, a lot of people now will know the sign thank you. They'll even be signing thank you to me, or they'll be like, oh, how do you say you're welcome? So we'll just those like little teaching moments, and they're just ready. They're ready, they're motivated. And that for me means a lot. That's really what is very touching when I go out and present or do interviews, is that people are eager and ready and they're excited to work with us, which is so awesome. So that's one thing I've learned for sure. Yeah, so I guess in summary, what I can say is I just feel really embraced in this. So very grateful for that.
Well, Dana, I am thrilled you are our Washington State Teacher of the Year, and I can't wait to see what you do next. And a tremendous thank you for taking the time to speak with me today.
You are welcome.